Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Skeith. I'm the managing partner of Richards Rodriguez and Skeith. We're happy that you all are with us today as we all kind of work together and try to figure out this new world that we're in, as we're hopefully looking at the light at the end of the tunnel for COVID. And so we are talking about, well, what happens, after the current stage that we're in? How do we start thinking about, for those of us who aren't back, in our normal workplace currently, how do we start coming back? And there are questions around how do we do that, and how do we do that safely for our people, but also how do we do that in a way that protects us legally? And so that's what we're talking about here today. So welcome, everyone, and we've got a good lineup of smart people that are way smarter than I am to talk about this morning. My partner, Tanya Lucio, who's the head of our employment and labor law section. We have Ann Derrick, who's a litigation partner, also working on employment law with us. And my partner, Jim Howitz, who is a transactional lawyer and also doing employment law counseling. So we have a good group today. Because of the number of people, we've got everybody muted. But what we're going to do is a short presentation about the stuff we know, and what we sort of imagine people are interested in first. And then after that, we're going to take questions and do question and answer. And what I'd ask you to do is to drop questions in the chat, and I'll be MC here so we can have clarity, and we'll pose the questions to our panelists. So welcome again, and let's get started.
All right, so the first question that we have is, can I require my employees to take the COVID-19 vaccine? And what Ann and Tanya and I are going to try to do is to give you what they refer to in law school as the black letter law with this, but I want you to understand that there's a nuance in how this is going to be applied in a situation, and also we're going to try to fit this into an hour meeting, and so this is intended to be an overview. So the answer to the magic answer to can you require this is that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission last year, the EEOC, has been issuing guidelines throughout the pandemic, but last year issued guidelines that said that employers have the right to impose a mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policy using the same rules that apply to all vaccinations. Employers can impose requirements to make sure that employees don't pose threats to the health and safety of other individuals in the workplace. So, so what we're doing is we're looking at the laws that are out there, particularly the workplace discrimination laws and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so, the answer, like all lawyers like to say, is yes, you can do this, but there's exceptions. And so you have limits, and the limits are very similar to what you have with other employer mandated vaccinations, which are religious exemptions and disability exemptions. And both of those are fairly broad. And what you do when you have an exemption like that is you have to look to see whether or not you could reasonably accommodate the employee. And in this case, an accommodation is, can the employee work at home? Can you do some kind of bubble in the office? Is there social distancing? Are there things that you could do to make the situation work if an exception applies? But employers are kind of their, I don't want to say get out of jail free card, but the counter to that is that the accommodation can't place an undue hardship on the employer, which, if you look at that, the EEOC looks at cost, and they look at whether or not the implementation of the accommodation is logistically burdensome. But that's kind of the overview. Is that if you really want to do this, whether you really should, you can, but there are going to be some instances where you're going to have to deal with employees that are going to have a valid reason for not taking the vaccine.
Okay, so that brings us to what about documentation and confidentiality? So you do get confidentiality issues if you decide to kind of track whether your employees have received the vaccination or not. So, as a general rule, you as an employer can't make medical inquiries of your employees. And the good news is that the EEOC has said that, you know, kind of overseeing the administration of a vaccine is not a medical inquiry. But, you know, the caveat there is that the screening questions that someone might have to answer in order to get the shot would qualify as a medical inquiry. And it can be a little tricky in terms of what qualifies as a medical inquiry. So, setting that aside, you basically just can't do it unless the questions are job related and consistent with business necessity, which can be tricky. So, really, there's two best practices if you're going to, require that your employees get a vaccine. The first is that it's best to outsource the administration of the vaccine. While you may want to attempt to make things more convenient by bringing someone on site who could administer the vaccine, that does expose you to a little bit more liability. So if you just direct your employees to a pharmacy or a doctor's office, then you as the employer don't need to be concerned about the questions that that third party may ask in advance of the employee getting the vaccine. The second way to avoid any issues with medical inquiries is to offer the vaccine at your workplace, but on a voluntary basis only. The logic there being that if the shot is voluntary, then the questions that one would have to answer to get the shot would be voluntary as well. You do need to be careful not to, so you can refuse to give a vaccine to someone who will answer any of the screening questions, but you can't retaliate against an employee for declining to answer those questions. In terms of documentation around the vaccine, you are allowed, per the EEOC, to require that an employee bring you proof of having received the vaccine. What you need to be cautious of there is ensuring that you're not receiving too much medical information about the employee, and that's definitely something to avoid. So one way to manage the information that you're getting is to provide your employee with a very simple form that just says, I received the vaccine, and then the doctor's signature. And that can be your way of sort of protecting against receiving medical information that you shouldn't receive and don't really want to have to receive or manage. You do want to be careful about asking any follow-up questions. You wouldn't want to stray into the territory, for example, of asking an employee why he or she didn't receive the vaccine, as that can be a medical inquiry. And we're going to kind of address in a couple of minutes, how you can handle an employee who is declining to receive the vaccine.
Okay, so hi, Tanya Lucio. So we've got the sort of overview. Can you do it? And yes, with some caveats. Yes, you can do it. But should you make it mandatory? And each business is different. So you're going to have to look at this through the lens of your own business to decide whether you want to have a mandatory vaccination requirement or whether you want to just do sort of an encouragement incentive kind of encouragement and or incentive type policy. Now, sometimes whether someone has to get a vaccine may be dictated by that person's position. For example, if somebody travels internationally, they may be required by the laws of other countries and to have a vaccine before they come, go to the country. So there may be some situations where maybe it's not a global mandatory policy across the all employees, but there are situations where maybe some people are going to have to get it. And again, we'll talk about what if they refuse in a bit, but that's one issue. Another issue is just, or another part of the assessment really is just look at the pros and cons with respect to your own business. What are some of the pros if you wanted to have a mandatory vaccination policy? What are some of the pros there? Well, obviously less likely that you're going to have an outbreak at work, and so presumably that's better for everybody's health. It's better for your business because people aren't absent from work, for extended periods of time with COVID. And there's just sort of a whole kind of greater good public safety issue around it as well. It also, on the pro side, it also reduces the risk of litigation if someone actually gets sick from COVID. And it's a little bit harder, or even harder, I would say, to pin it on the fact that, hey, they got this at work, and my employer wasn't taking reasonable measures to keep me safe. Well, what are the cons on the mandatory vaccination policy? Well, some of them are that there's a litigation risk for personal injury claim if somebody takes the vaccine and then gets sick from the vaccine, has adverse side effects. This is a vaccine that has gotten emergency use authorization, so it hasn't gone through the final, hey, this is approved and we know it's safe. I mean, this was done on a fast track, and great that it has been, but there are some risks. I mean, people could get sick from it. There are also litigation risks for some of the claims that Jim and Ann are alluding to for discrimination, for failure to accommodate somebody who has a legitimate reason, a legally protected reason to not take the vaccine. So it does open you up for that risk of litigation. There's also morale issues and, I'd say sort of negative PR type issues from, maybe from disgruntled employees who are not happy that they are being mandated to take this vaccine. I think this stems around, or can stem around, just the fact that this is an emergency use authorization, and we don't have a lot of data and experience with it yet. So there may be a lack of confidence about whether the vaccine is even safe or not. And then there are the issues of people feeling like their personal beliefs are being infringed upon. Whether you are anti-vaccine generally, or you're just you just don't want somebody telling you that you have to do anything in particular with respect to your health. Then, you've also got the con of you might lose employees if you make it mandatory for some of the same reasons, some of these same sort of morale, negative PR kind of reasons. And then, there are greater risks of ADA violation, American with Disability Act violations, if you decide that you do want to do it and you sort of screw up the pre-screening question part of it, that opens it up. That opens you up for some liability as well. And so again, in terms of the mandatory, whether you want to do it, you've just got to decide. Okay, look, what's the cost benefit? What are the risks that your business wants to take? What's important as to whether you want to do it or not. Now, on the converse, you could do something that is really encouraging, and like I said, or making some sort of, or offering some sort of incentive for people who get the vaccine. So again, we look at pros and cons of it. What are the pros? Well, the cons of mandating it are gone, right? So that's a pro, and there's quite a few cons in the mandatory policy. You pro for an incentive encouraging plan is that you still might get quite a bit of compliance if you're using the carrot versus the stick approach. It gives employees kind of more time to try to digest whether they think it's safe or not, and and they don't feel like they are being forced to do something, without enough information. And then the employees also can get a benefit. So if you want to make it truly an incentive plan, you can give them, you can pay them to go get the vaccine. You can give them an additional cash incentive. You could give them gift cards. You might be able to maybe give them some sort of a reduction in their health premium or a subsidy towards their health premium if they get the vaccine, a health insurance premium if they get the vaccine. So there's lots of things that you could come up with and be creative to incentivize people to want to go get this vaccine. What are the cons of the voluntary vaccine program? Obviously, higher risk of an outbreak of COVID at work, and so if it takes longer for people to get the vaccine, then it could impact employee health, and consequently could impact your business if you've got a lot of people that are out on COVID related leave. And then you've got the litigation risk if somebody does get COVID at work. So that's kind of the overview there on mandatory versus voluntary programs.
And if I'm kind of hearing that right, Tanya, I mean, so you can make people do it. I think in general, we're saying unless you got a really good reason, you probably shouldn't do it because of you probably shouldn't make people unless there's liability there. And Jim, a question for you is, okay, so that's employees and sort of the pros and cons of mandating it. I mean, what about customers? What about those of us who have people coming and visiting us in our place of work? What's the wisdom there?
The wisdom there, and to follow along what Tanya was saying, is that the answer of can you is a relatively short answer. The answer of should you is a much longer answer, and what Ann talked about how you do that is a longer answer as well. And so, what about customers and vendors and visitors? It falls more into the implementation of how you do this, and the standard that you have to concern yourself with is that employers have a duty to create a safe workspace, and so how you do that is really going to depend on a lot of factors, and you want to look at the nature of the business that you have. If you look at the type of business that I work for a business that has an office and has the ability to restrict where visitors go, and within we can have very controlled visits from vendors, and we can really monitor how this works. And so, do we need to have some our customers and vendors have a vaccine? Well, maybe not. But then if you look at if we hire a temp and the temp's going to be sitting with the rest of us, how do we handle that? And so you really need to look at creating that safe workspace, but creating precautions that are appropriate for it. And so as a business owner or HR person, you have the right to institute appropriate precautions. If you're going to call me on the phone and ask me how to do this, we're going to have a long discussion about what exactly, who are the vendors, who are the customers, how are they coming in, how are they interacting with your staff, what's the real danger here, and trying to come up with something appropriate. And it may be, depending on the nature of your business, you want to do this, but it's a balancing act because you're gonna lose customers or you're gonna lose potential vendors, as Tanya was talking about, and so you have to weigh the pros and cons of that, and institute something that's gonna work for you, and it's gonna be a compromise.
Thanks. I mean, so going to to questions in the chat. So I invite you to ask questions in the chat here. Anne, let me direct this one to you, which is, let's say that someone, that an employer decided to have vaccines be mandatory. Do you think that a procedure where the employee showed a copy of the CDC card that's provided with the, with the vaccination be good enough proof that they were vaccinated? The question actually was the first dose sufficient, but
Yeah, I think I think that's a good solution. I haven't seen the card myself, but I think that would be a fine solution for employers. Absolutely.
yeah, Tanya, any other comment about that?
Yep. Sorry about that. No, I agree with that. I think if the nuance there, I think you said it was for the first vaccine. I think, probably we need to make sure that you've got proof that both rounds of the vaccine were taken. But in terms of the type of proof, that seems like that would be just fine.
And Tanya, this is sort of two versions of the two sides, I think, of a similar question. So let's say you took the encouraging path where you just encourage, you provided information about the vaccine, you encouraged people to do it. Maybe you gave people paid time off to do it, or, you did it in the workplace. You had the vaccinations happen in the workplace. I know you touched on this, but, is there potential liability exposure even in the encouraging path?
It's hard. It's not a guarantee, right? Because we can't ever tell what a jury is going to do here. But I think that if you just decide you want to have a voluntary plan or program, my opinion is that doesn't increase your liability. I think that, and that is as long as you are following all the other safety mandates. So if what the question is, if I decide to go voluntary versus mandatory, am I exposing myself to more risk? I don't think so necessarily. But you do have to make sure, I think, in any circumstance, even with a mandatory vaccine plan, I think you still, for the time being, and until the CDC says otherwise and the other authorities and experts say otherwise, you need to be following the recommended safety protocols. Now, granted, the CDC is recommending that people get vaccinated. And so, that's not one that you are forcing upon people, but at least you're giving them the opportunity. And part of, part of what the concern is for, what your liability is, ultimately who's going to have to pay for it, right? And there are two things that you're looking at when you're talking about people bringing claims. There's ultimate liability, which is, are you responsible? Are you going to be found, liable? And the other part is, can you be sued, right? And so just because you're not liable doesn't mean you can't be sued, which is why you want to make sure that you're following safety protocols. And so two things I actually did want to kind of talk about here is, so what happens, if you have this voluntary plan, and then somebody ends up getting sick at work? What does that look like? And there's two tracks really here. One is, first of all, you hope that it is covered by workers' comp insurance if you have workers' comp insurance, because that bars all other claims unless you are grossly negligent and somebody dies. That is going to take care of it. Comp is going to handle it. But the big question is getting COVID at work going to be covered? And under any scenario, whether it's covered by comp or it's not, the employee's still going to have to prove that they got it at work, which according to the Texas Medical Association, they say that's going to be really hard because this is a global pandemic, so who knows where you got it? It could have been anywhere. So that's one hard part for an employee actually proving liability, establishing liability. But the other part is for workers' comp is, it is unclear right now, at least in Texas, whether contracting COVID at work is compensable under workers' comp law. And, there is generally the law is that, if it's sort of an occupational disease that, that where people are placed in jobs where they're in a higher risk of getting some kind of illness than other people in the general public, then you've got a better shot at it being covered under workers' comp. But not everybody is going to fall into that category. And even, and the commentary is sort of, well, look, not even every essential worker is necessarily going to fall into that category. Certainly nurses, and you would think police and EMS, although recently there was an article that, EMS claims are getting denied, workers' comp claims are getting denied. So that's a tough part to establish under workers' comp. And so then, sort of the bummer is, well, if workers' comp doesn't cover it, then what? Well, that doesn't mean the employee doesn't have a claim. They still have a claim potentially. They got to prove they got it at work, so that's number one. And then they've got to show that their employer did not, take reasonable measures to keep them safe. So again, not to sort of beat the dead horse here, but that's why it's important still to continue to follow all the safety protocols. And, and there's guidance from the Texas Department of Health, Health Services. And there's a nifty little checklist. If you guys don't want it, we can send a link out on that. Obviously there's the CDC guidance, and then OSHA to this point has not had mandatory binding guidance. But this new administration has recently issued a directive to OSHA saying, hey, you need to put some safety standards in place. So those are going to be, I expect those will be coming down the pike, and those will be mandatory requirements.
Hey, Tanya or Jim, I mean, so this is another question from the chat that I think kind of connects to that, which is, okay, we're hearing maybe workers' comp insurance covers if somebody gets sick at work. What happens if you require all employees to get the shot and somebody has a reaction to it? Is there potential workers' comp coverage there, or what do you think that's going to look like?
I think you have a better shot at having that covered by comp. I haven't seen any cases on it or any authority on it, but to me that sounds like, hey, if that was mandated, and you were required to get it, and because of your work and you got sick, I mean, that to me seems like you've got a better shot. Is it a guarantee? No, but better shot. Then if it's not covered, you're still in the same spot, that, okay, well, now the employee has to prove that that's what caused the illness, and that, and that you were not acting as a reasonable, prudent business in requiring the shot. And I think, that's I don't know. My gut is that that's a harder thing to convince people that it's unreasonable for you to require people to have vaccines to come to work. But hey, hard to tell what a jury would do with it.
Follow-up question on customers coming in. What do you think about, if there's vendors, clients coming into your office sort of constantly, or people that you're working with who are not employees? What do you think about a template release or waiver of liability, or having them sign something that, having them sign something that's saying that they're vaccinated or had a recent test? In other words, is there some documentation that might make sense for visitors?
I think that having some documentation that clearly points out the risks of not being vaccinated, and and warning a customer or a vendor that that they're not being vaccinated could potentially cause serious health issues is a bit of an is the easiest path here. I'm a little less sold on waivers of liability in general. Any kind of waiver of liability, that falls into that. They may or may not hold up. In this case, I think that you would have a tougher time if you were um, a potential visitor to an office to prove that you actually got COVID at that particular office. And so, it's kind of murky. I would take a few steps back and say, well, you have customers visit all the time. What's the interaction and how does it work, and how are you protecting, what precautions have you put in place to prevent issues for both the customer and for the employee. And we see that in places of business now with the protective shields, with mask mandates, with things like that. And so um, where this falls in, and I was gonna answer any question you asked, Paul. I was gonna answer it this way: is that I have most of the employment questions that I get from HR people fall into the I really want to do this, and when you probe in as to why, you try to eliminate the because I think it's a good idea, or because it's best for everybody, and you try to really probe what that is. If it's a legal requirement, then that's one thing, but it's like when the pandemic first started, I had lots of requests from people that was like, should I mandate that employees have to come into the office? And the answer was, well, why? Or the question was why, and the answer was, well, because I really think that they should be here. And so that's the thing behind all this. I'm going to really ask: Are you doing this because you think it's a good idea, or because you need to do it? And let's think about, if you do need to do it, let's build let's build a structure that truly limits your liability, because a piece of paper is a piece of paper.
So Anne and Tanya,
Paul, let me just add one thing on that, to that, on the liability side. So there was some, at the federal level, Congress was trying to push through some immunity for businesses, which did not, which did not pass. But Governor Abbott has recently said that that's one of his priorities, is to get some legislation that protects businesses and presumably employers. So don't know what that looks like. It's certainly not even drafted yet, but it's something that might be coming down the pike to help businesses.
a number of questions about sort of a direct, straight up. Say that you're in the encouraging category. You're not mandating, right, for employees to get the vaccine. Can you ask all employees whether they've gotten the vaccine? That's a question. And kind of a related question is, are you allowed to ask customers and visitors if they have the vaccine, just when they walk in the door?
So you can ask employees if they've been vaccinated or not. As I mentioned before, you do want to be cautious about follow-up questions. So, if you hear a no, you should not ask, why not? You need to take the answer at face value. In terms of customers or vendors, I imagine it would be, you could certainly ask. Jim or Tanya, do you disagree?
I don't think there's a problem with asking your customers or vendors.
And I think in some places, depending on your industry, it may even be necessary. Like I know that I do some volunteer work in a nursing facility, and that is clearly on their list of questions for people who are entering for obvious reasons, right? So,
And that's where you have to weigh the nature of the of your business, and the protections that you need to institute at your particular business, and the I would suggest that you be reasonable, and you think about right sizing your requirements for what you're doing, and that the application of it be consistent. And so, I saw in the chat there was questions about, well, can we do this without a policy? My first answer to that would be, well, why don't you have a policy? Because if you don't have a policy, then you're not going to, you really opened yourself up to, I applied the rules selectively to somebody because I wanted to discriminate against them. And, how you insulate yourself from that in every case is you have benign policy and you apply it. So, that's the thing to think about here.
to make it harder here, we're getting great questions. To make it harder, what about asking potential employees? And I think maybe underlying that question is, can you make employment decisions based on whether someone has had a vaccine or not?
I think this is going to, this is going to follow the same analysis that you're going through with employees. And I think, and Jim and Ann, please jump in here. But I think, yes, you can ask potential employees if they've been vaccinated, and whether you can make a decision or not is going to depend, I think, on whether those folks have a basis for why, a legally protected basis for why they haven't gotten a vaccination, and and whether they can do their job with a reasonable accommodation. Generally speaking, like outside the COVID, the COVID and vaccine scenario, I mean, you can ask an employee, hey, you basically say these are the essential functions of the job and the essential requirements, right? And having a vaccine could be an essential requirement. Can you, and here are the things that you can, here are the things that you have to be able to do. Can you do these things with or without a reasonable accommodation? And so if your policy is, hey, everybody's got to be vaccinated, and the person says, I'm not vaccinated, then okay, is there we basically have got to find out, is there a reason why, or a legally protected reason that would allow them not to be vaccinated, and then can they do their job just like with any other employee? Can they do their job with some accommodation? And if they can't, then they can't. If they can, then okay, great. You can make that accommodation. I don't know, Jim and Ann, you want to add anything to that?
I think the key is doing it consistently and really focusing on what the accommodations are. If you have somebody that's a delivery person and they're going to be going to people's houses, and you want to be able to say that all of your employees have been vaccinated, it'd be really difficult to accommodate somebody in that role that isn't.
And if someone is on leave as an accommodation, I mean, is there any requirement that it be paid?
No, there's not a requirement that it be paid leave, unless it's part of your, consistent with the rest of your leave policy, right? So as long as you're treating the disabled person, and I'm talking about disability leave. I'm not talking about religious accommodation leave, which is a little bit different, but disability leave, as long as you are treating them the same as you're treating anybody else who would need to take leave, then that's fine. You don't have to pay them for that leave.
What about the rules that have been in place for about the last year about giving employees time off when they get a test, or they're waiting for the results from a test?
Yeah, so this is a little bit more along the COVID lines and the vaccine line, but as most of you are probably aware, you were required to give certain forms of expanded FMLA leave and sick leave for qualifying reasons in 2020. but that expired as of December 31st, 2020. So employers are no longer required to give that kind of leave. But if you do want to continue to offer that leave, you can get reimbursed with tax credits through March 31st of this year. And all of the same limitations apply as they did before in terms of caps on the amount of pay, the qualifying reasons the employees have to show, and documentation requirements. But employers do remain eligible for tax credits through March 31st.
I am not a tax lawyer, and I'm also don't have a crystal ball, but I have seen some commentary from folks that they're potentially, even if an employee has already taken all of their FMLA leave during 2020, that they still may be able to take FMLA leave in 2021. This FFCRA FMLA leave in 2021, and you can get the tax credit. But the nuance is if you're on a calendar year plan that resets. And so I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but just know that if somebody's already exhausted their leave in 2020, then that may or may not be the end of the story as to whether you could voluntarily pay them for additional leave in 2021 and get a tax credit.
Questions come up about, let's say that you have a mandatory vaccination policy, and an employee says to you, I don't want to take the vaccine because I've already had COVID and I've already got some immunity. Is that is that a medical reason?
I would say no. It hasn't. We go through the same scheme as to whether or not you have to accommodate somebody, and I don't think that the I already had COVID falls under the anything that's defined as what you need to give someone an accommodation.
I haven't seen the absolute latest on this, but at least the guidance I had seen at some point was, it was unclear whether just because you've had COVID, you couldn't get it again. And I think there were even some reported cases of people getting COVID twice. So, so I think, I don't think that gets you out of it.
Here's a hard one that's part business judgment, I think, which is, let's say that we're at the end of the year, right? We're at the end of the year. We're talking about an office, so a place where people could, are currently working from home via Zoom, but the magic isn't there, right? I mean, there's something missing by being on these little boxes on the screen instead of face to face. Are you able to say to people at some time, let's say late fall, everybody's got to come in starting, November 1st?
Yeah, I think you can. I'm sorry, Jim. Go ahead. You go ahead.
No, that's you said exactly what I was going to say, and you want to take a lot of precautions. I mean, as an employer, you have a duty to provide a safe workspace. Clearly, the world has changed and things have shifted. So I don't think you can go back to what it was before, and you would really need to take a good hard look at how do your employees interact in the office and what kind of precautions and rules are you going to have in place to make sure that folks are safe.
Right now, the guidance is vaccines aren't the end, isn't the end all. You still need to maintain, and follow all the other safety protocols. So I think, to Jim's point, you just got to make sure that you're doing everything you can to keep the workplace safe.
I think just wanting to be respectful of everyone's time, the last question here for this morning, another big picture sort of integrated business and law question. If you have to be so careful about asking, particularly employees, whether or not they've been vaccinated, does it make sense to do it?
I think it's worthwhile because you got to be careful about the follow-up questions, but and if you do, get in a situation where, somebody says, no, I haven't been vaccinated, then, you probably need to reach out to your legal counsel and say, okay, let's sort of figure out how to work through this. But I mean, the point is to get everybody vaccinated and get everybody as safe as you can. And I think asking that question is worth, the potential risks associated with follow-up questions. So I think it's worthwhile.
It'll also help you evaluate the what you need to do to provide a safe workspace. So I agree, and I don't want to be flip in the last minute of the call, but you can't encourage behavior without having some way to measure it, and so if you're going to do even if you're going to do a voluntary thing here, I think it's worth it would be worth it to incorporate that question into your voluntary program.
And I think Jim's already said this, but whatever you decide, if you decide to have a voluntary, mandatory, or if you decide to have either one, you should get a plan in place. You should have a policy in place that's clear. I think part of what's important about this time that we're in is making sure that we're communicating as business owners, communicating with our employees, and making sure that they know what's going on. And even if we don't know, we don't know everything, we let them know what we do know, and at least try to keep them in the loop, because I think that goes a long way to kind of easing sort of morale, or easing people and keeping morale up.
Thank you, everyone. I know all of your time is very valuable. We appreciate you spending some time this morning with us. Eventually, the presentation is going to be available, I think, on our website, David Burrell, in some form or another. And also, we're going to be keeping up with this, because obviously this is, we're all learning as we go through this. So we'll be, if you're not on our email list, please sign up for that if you're interested, and we'll keep an eye on this and keep folks updated as things progress. All right, everyone, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.